Welcome to Life Esteem, a program committed to delivering information that's important to you and your community. Your hosts are Nathaniel and Patricia Gadsden.
Hello and welcome again to Life Esteem. Always great to have you as a viewer. Hey, today we're going to talk to a reporter right here at WHP TV. Her name is Jaime Meyers, and we're so glad to have her here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes, fantastic. Well, Jaime, so you've been a reporter here at WHP TV for how long?
For just over 4 years now.
Is that right? Fantastic. And you're not from this area, I take it?
No, I'm from the Detroit area. Reporters tend to have to move a lot for jobs, and so I came here about 4 years ago. And so far, I really enjoy it. It's a great place to be, where it's a great mix of exciting news to cover and a high quality of life, because sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes as a reporter you can live in a really nice place to live, but there's not a whole lot of news going on. And then there's other places where there's a lot of news, but not such a good place to live. This is a good mix.
Now, that is interesting. I never thought about it in that regard. Well, now, as a morning reporter, what does that look like for you? What does that mean?
Well, my day starts, I have to be at work at 3:30, so definitely very used to getting up early. So, well, I don't know if you ever really get used to it, but you find ways to cope. And so then usually I come in, and usually that morning is just, that's when you find out what you're going to cover. So I never know whether it's going to be weather or it could be a feature. You never know. And then so I come in, and we have about an hour and a half. The show starts at 5, and then we usually do 4 segments throughout the newscast. So and sometimes we stick with what we're going to do, but my photographer Jim that I work with, we're the only crew in the morning. So if anything breaks, we go. So so it keeps it interesting.
Rain, snow, sleet, or anything, huh? You got to be there.
Absolutely. I mean, we always have to be prepared. I mean, we know some days we can be outside literally for hours at a time. So you always have to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. But then there could be other days where you're inside a nice warm office building. So you never know. You
know, you say to young people in school, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And they'll come up with all these things. You know, hear a lot of them say, I want to be a reporter, right? But man, what a great job. And tell us, what got you into being a reporter?
You know, I was one of those people who always loved the news and just loved wondering what was going on and current events. And when younger people do ask me, how do you get into that? I always say the best thing to do is internships, because it's not for everyone. I mean, you really do, you give up a lot, you work crazy hours, you work holidays, a lot of times you can be ready to walk out the door, and then something happens, and then you're on for another 5-6 hours. It happens, so you have to be used to that. But I did an internship and ended up loving it, and I actually started behind the scenes as an assignment desk editor, which is a really important part of any kind of newsroom, because they're always listening to the scanner, seeing what's going on, and then calling police stations and finding out, okay, is this worth sending a crew to? But that's a tough job, because you have to be on all the time. And I kind of got sick of just always being in the building, and you hear about all these exciting things, and then you have to send other people to go. So then my choices were basically be a photographer or a reporter, and those photographers have to carry a lot of heavy gear. So I wanted no part of that. So
they got that, huh? Let me just ask Jaime, and I don't know if there's any parallel or similarities. A reporter for a TV show, how does that differ from a reporter for a newspaper?
Well, there are a lot of similarities, of course, because you have the same basic goal of telling the story. One of the reasons why I chose TV is I like being able to show the pictures, and I feel like that really helps. It definitely changes the way that you're writing, because you have to write maybe in a more simple way, because you only really have one time to grab the viewer and to make it clear to them, whereas a newspaper article, they can go into a little more depth and they have a little more room, and if you don't understand something, you can go back and reread, but you've just got one shot as television. So there's definitely that, and certainly the different deadlines. That's something that they have a little more flexibility with, although they do have firm deadlines, but certainly for us, sometimes it can be hard when something happens at 4 o'clock and you're on the air at 5, and so that's not a lot of time to try and get the video and interviews and get it in time for the newscast.
Now, you mentioned internship, and so when you went to school, did you actually have that in mind, or did you kind of find that that was something that, you know, piqued your interest?
It was a little bit of both. I think I went through probably what every student goes through, where they go in and maybe I'll be a lawyer, maybe I'll be a veterinarian, and so being a reporter was something that it was one of my interests, but it wasn't really until I got into a newsroom and loved that environment that I thought, yep, this is what I want to do.
So what was your major?
Communications.
What's communications? Okay.
Fantastic.
They didn't have, I went to the University of Michigan and they didn't have a specific journalism program, so communications, I mean, that covers so much.
Yeah.
So since I knew that this was, I had the idea of this is what I wanted to do, I just tried to take a lot more of those classes that were more journalism focused as opposed to public relations or something like that.
Fantastic. And so where did you actually start? I mean, you know, your first big job, where was it?
Well, the first job growing up in Detroit and being at school at the University of Michigan, it was in a Detroit market, so that was pretty interesting to walk into that. I mean, because Detroit is one of the biggest markets in the country, so you have people who are at the top of their game there, and so it was really a great place to learn, and so that was fantastic to see this is how you're supposed to do it. And so that was great. And then, but my first on-air job, you always have to start in a small market. So that was in northern Michigan, which that was the place where I say it was a great place to live, it was beautiful, but not a lot happened. But as a first-time reporter, I mean, that's you really don't want to start in a place with a lot of viewers because of all the mistakes that you make when you're on air, and so it's good to start in a smaller market as get your training ground, you could say.
And I didn't realize that in the consideration as to looking at that. So, and you made the comment earlier that a lot of reporters have to move around. Okay, when you say move around, now you know that means going to other markets and finding their niche or.
Exactly. Well, the way it's not really like a typical business where you can kind of work your way up within that type of business. It's more to move up, you kind of have to move markets. Like the way it works is the markets are all ranked from 1 to 212 or something. It changes, and they're based on population. So a city like New York is #1, LA is #2, and then going down the line, like to give our viewers an idea, the Harrisburg, York, Lancaster market is 41. So it's actually a fairly, it's a good sized market to be in. And one of the reasons why it's so big is we cover a huge area. So that's, you know, covering all these different counties. So really, and it is something that as you move up and get a smaller size number means a bigger place market, and then that generally just means that you're working with people more of your caliber, and sometimes it can be more money, and it's a good way to move up. But there are a lot of people who they set out with, they have dreams that, oh, they're going to be network and go to CNN, and then they realize working in local news can really be interesting, and you really get to be a part of the community, and you get to recognize people and follow stories as they go through, as opposed to just you do it and then you move on to something else. And so, so I like local news, and I was probably one of those people who, when we first thought, I was like, oh, it'd be great to be network, and now I love local news.
Well, you know, you run into so many different types of stories as a reporter, and so I guess there's some stories that sort of stand out to you, and you know, some good, some bad.
Right.
You know, just share it without talking about necessarily the details of the stories. Just share some of the types of stories that you may have covered, and the things that may have really kind of, you know, just grabbed you. You may never forget that story. You know.
Well, I am what's called a general assignment reporter, so it's whatever happens that day is what we go out on. And there's certain ones that I've done. When I lived in Flint, Michigan, I did a story we got a heroin dealer who agreed to show us how he targets kids in schools. And that was just, oh, it was shocking, and it was so disturbing. But that's one of those stories that you said, it stays with you as well. And there's another story here that I've done that I followed at CBS 21, where there's a little girl from Mechanicsburg named Katie O'Brien who battled this very rare form of brain cancer, and she ended up passing away about 1.5 years ago. But it was just meeting her family and seeing the way that this family handled such a tough thing, and they got to the point where they realized the doctors had said, there's nothing we can do, and having to bring her home from St. Jude's and make that kind of decision. So those are the stories too that stay with you too.
Grab you, wow. You know, and as you were speaking there, just dawned on me, what were you doing 9/11 when all that happened? Were you a reporter then? And
that was when I was working on the assignment desk when I was in Detroit, and I was working nights, so I'm a little embarrassed to say that I actually slept through the first part of it. And what had happened, because it had been a really late night the night before, we had breaking news, didn't get out of the station until 2 o'clock the night before, and so then the next morning, well, I've of course asked all my friends and family if you ever see anything happening.